You know, life is not a game of pleasing everyone, especially not those who feed on your silence. There's a particular type of person, a manipulative, deceptive, self-obsessed individual, a narcissist. And not just any narcissist, an evil one, the kind that thrives when you're unsure of yourself, that feeds off your self-doubt, that smiles while they destroy your sense of self, one subtle manipulation at a time. And here's what they fear most, the truth. But not just any truth, your truth, spoken out loud, without apology. You see, when you look someone like that in the eye, and you say, you don't get to control my reality anymore, something inside them shatters. Why? Because control is all they have. Illusions, lies, games. They construct a false kingdom built on your compliance, your fear, your silence. But the moment you speak truth, with clarity and conviction, you destroy their illusion, you end the game. Understand this. An evil narcissist doesn't just fear confrontation. They fear exposure. They fear someone who can see through them and still stand tall. Not because you're aggressive. Not because you're cruel, but because you're anchored in truth. And truth is dangerous to those who live in deception. And the most dangerous thing you can ever say to them is this: I see who you are and I choose to walk away. That phrase, spoken calmly, powerfully, is the death knell of their control. It says, you don't own me. It says you're no longer the author of my story. It says your manipulation stops here. If you want to build a life of strength, of purpose, of meaning, you must learn to speak that truth. You must be willing to look evil in the face and not flinch. This isn't about vengeance. It's not about hate. It's about liberation. The tyrant only rules until the people wake up. And your awakening begins the moment you open your mouth and say, evil narcissists thrive on silence and control. You say, look, their power doesn't come from physical dominance or overt aggression. It comes from psychological manipulation, subtle control, and the gradual erosion of your confidence and identity. They are not always loud or dramatic. In fact, the most dangerous ones are often calm, calculated, and quietly invasive. They study you. They observe your weaknesses, your triggers, your insecurities, and then they carefully construct an environment in which they become the center of your emotional universe. Their methods are precise. They use compliments to pull you in, then subtle criticisms to keep you guessing. One moment you're praised for your talents, your looks, or your intelligence. The next, you're being questioned, doubted, or dismissed. It's intentional. It's a push and pull that keeps you emotionally invested and uncertain. They want you to crave their approval because the more you chase it, the more power they have. Silence is their greatest ally. Not just your silence, but also the silence they create around the truth. They gaslight you, make you question your memory, your feelings, your perception of reality. They spin stories so convincingly that even when you know something feels off, you hesitate to speak. You wonder, am I overreacting? Maybe it's me. That's exactly where they want you, trapped in self-doubt, isolated, and confused. And here's the dark genius of it. The longer you stay silent, the more you begin to internalize the lies. The more you accommodate, the more you lose touch with your own voice. And it starts subtly, avoiding conflict, brushing things off, minimizing how much something hurt you. But over time, you stop trusting your own feelings. You stop defending your boundaries. You hand over your inner power, one small moment at a time. Control doesn't always look like domination. It often looks like a help, like advice, like a concern. An evil narcissist will wrap their manipulation in language that sounds supportive, but is actually condescending and undermining. They might say things like, I'm only saying this because I care, or you're too sensitive, or no one else would put up with what you do. These phrases are designed to make you second-guess yourself while painting them as the rational, benevolent one. They isolate you emotionally too. Not always physically, though that happens, but they plant seeds of doubt about the people who support you. I don't think your friends really understand you. Your family's always been a bit controlling, don't you think? Suddenly, the people who once grounded you seem distant or flawed, and the narcissist becomes the only one you would trust. That's the goal, to make themselves the single point of validation in your world. But the real power of an evil narcissist begins to crumble the moment you reclaim your voice. When you stop staying silent, when you start trusting your instincts again, when you begin saying no, when you draw boundaries and stick to them, even if your voice shakes. Because control only works when you allow it. Silence is what gives the manipulation space to grow. Your truth is what kills it. Speaking up is not easy. It can be terrifying, especially after months or years of being silenced or made to feel crazy. But every time you speak a small truth, every time you say, "That's not okay," or "I remember what happened, this doesn't feel right," you chip away at their power. And they know it. That's why they react so strongly when you start setting boundaries. That's why they lash out, guilt trip, or play the victim. Because deep down, they understand that their control is built on lies and illusions, and the truth is their biggest threat. It's not about shouting. It's not about shouting. It's not about fighting. It's about clarity. Calm, grounded clarity that says, "I know who I am. I know what I experienced, and I don't owe you silence anymore." That clarity is terrifying to someone who relies on distortion to survive. In the end, evil narcissists fear what they cannot manipulate. They fear the moment you stop seeking their approval. They fear the moment you stop explaining yourself. And most of all, they fear the version of you that no longer doubts your own voice. Because once you've found that voice, once you've broken the silence, you become untouchable. Their control crumbles, their illusion fades, and they're left alone with the one thing they cannot bear: the truth. The greatest weapon against them is your truth. Not a louder voice, not aggression, not revenge, just the quiet, unwavering certainty of who you are and what you've lived. There is something profoundly powerful about a person who refuses to abandon their own reality. When you know the truth of your experiences, when you refuse to let it be rewritten or denied, you become unshakable. That inner certainty radiates in ways words cannot fully explain. It grounds you. It frees you, and most importantly, it makes manipulation impossible. Truth, real truth, isn't just about facts or memories. It's about emotional clarity. It's the deep, visceral knowing of what hurt you, what broke your spirit, what wasn't okay, even if no one else saw it, even if others tried to justify it, even if you were the only one who stood there and felt the weight of it. That truth matters. And holding on to it is what keeps you from being swallowed by the narrative that someone else tries to impose on you. In toxic dynamics, the first thing that often gets taken is your voice. The second is your confidence in your own perception. You're told you're too sensitive, too dramatic, too forgetful. Over time, you start to believe it. You question whether your reactions were valid. You downplay your pain. You let things slide. You begin rewriting your own memories just to keep the peace. But deep down, in a place beyond language, the truth still lives. And it's waiting for the moment you decide you're no longer willing to pretend. Speaking the truth doesn't always mean shouting it from the rooftops. Sometimes it's a quiet decision. It's choosing to stop apologizing for how you feel. It's walking away instead of explaining yourself for the 100th time. It's saying, "That's not how I remember it," even when you're met with disbelief. It's letting someone be disappointed, angry, or confused, without feeling the need to fix it or change your story. This is not about bitterness. It's about liberation. Truth is light. It reveals, it clarifies, it restores. When you hold your truth without shame, you stop living in reaction to someone else's version of events. You stop dancing around their moods, their accusations, their attempts to rewrite history. You begin to live for something real, your own peace, your own healing, your own integrity. There's a calm that comes when you stop denying what you've lived through. It doesn't always make the pain go away, but it removes the fog. And with that clarity, you can finally breathe. You can see the patterns. You can make sense of the chaos. And most importantly, you can make different choices. You can choose boundaries. You can choose distance. You can choose yourself. And that changes everything. Once you live in truth, manipulation has no entry point. Because manipulation relies on confusion. It thrives in distortion and half-truths and guilt. But truth is solid. It's clean. It doesn't need justification. It just is. When someone tries to twist your words or gaslight your memory, truth stands there like a wall they can't climb. It doesn't fight back, it doesn't fight back, it doesn't flinch, it simply exists. That's why the moment you reclaim your truth, the game ends. The control starts to crumble. You're no longer moved by threats, by guilt, by the need for approval. You stop explaining yourself. You stop trying to be understood by someone who was never interested in understanding you in the first place, and something incredible happens. You begin to come back to yourself. Not the version they shaped, not the one that played small or stayed silent, but the real you. The version that remembers. The version that feels things deeply and knows that those feelings are valid. The version that doesn't need permission to take up space or to walk away. That version is powerful. That version doesn't beg, doesn't shrink, doesn't tolerate lies. Truth brings you back to life. And when you live from that place, you become someone no one can control. You become someone whose boundaries are non-negotiable, whose peace is guarded, whose voice cannot be stolen again. You may not be able to change the past, but you can stop it from repeating. And you do that by standing in your truth, by speaking it, by honoring it, by living it. Every time you do, you rewrite the story, not for them, but for you. And that's how you win, quietly, powerfully, truthfully. You don't get to control my reality anymore is a turning point. It's not just a sentence, it's a declaration of emotional independence, a moment of self-reclamation, and the end of a long, quiet war. It marks the shift from being someone who questioned everything about themselves to someone who finally trusts their own perception. It's the beginning of truth taking up space where confusion once lived. For many, arriving at this point doesn't happen in a flash. It's the result of months or even years of small betrayals, subtle manipulations, and emotional exhaustion. But when it finally comes, it's like something inside snaps into place. A line is drawn. The game is over. This phrase doesn't need to be shouted. It doesn't need to be dramatic. In fact, its power often lies in its stillness. When you say it, what you're really saying is, I'm done participating in a version of life that isn't real. It means no more bending yourself to fit someone else's delusion. No more shrinking your voice to avoid conflict. No more questioning whether your feelings are valid just because someone else refuses to acknowledge them. It means you've decided to stop outsourcing your reality to someone who benefits from you doubting it. There's a strange kind of peace that comes when you realize you no longer owe anyone the job of convincing them of your truth. You can simply say what's real for you, and that is enough. Whether they accept it or not is irrelevant. Their agreement is not required for your reality to stand. Once you grasp that, it becomes easier to walk away from conversations designed to confuse, from apologies that were never owed, from roles you never chose but somehow ended up playing. The beautiful thing about reclaiming your reality is that it doesn't just free you from the person who tried to control it. It frees you from all the internalized they planted along the way. The self-editing, the second-guessing. The habit of looking at yourself through their eyes instead of your own. That all begins to fall away. Slowly, maybe, but surely. Each time you say no to a false narrative, each time you stand firm in what you know, you grow stronger. You take back a piece of yourself that was never truly lost, only buried. And this shift ripples into every part of your life. Suddenly, you start noticing other places where you've allowed yourself to be made small. You recognize dynamics that once felt normal, but were, in truth, deeply unfair. You begin to understand that love isn't supposed to feel like fear, that support shouldn't come at the cost of your identity, that being close to someone doesn't require losing yourself in the process. These realizations aren't always easy. They can come with grief, anger, even shame. But they also come with freedom, the kind of freedom that can only be born from truth. You might not get closure. You might not get understanding. But what you do get is clarity, and that is far more valuable. Clarity is what allows you to move forward without dragging old wounds behind you. It's what helps you build relationships based on mutual respect, not power imbalances. It's what makes you unshakable in the face of future manipulation. Because once you've looked someone in the eye and said, you don't get to control my reality anymore, you don't go back to pretending. Of course, this path is not without resistance. When you stop playing the role someone cast you in, they'll likely push back. They'll accuse you of being difficult, ungrateful, or even cruel. That's okay. Let them. That's just the sound of control slipping through their fingers. Your job is not to soothe their discomfort. Your job is to protect your truth. And protecting it doesn't always mean confrontation. It can also mean distance. It can mean silence. It can mean choosing your peace over being understood by someone who never truly listened. The turning point is when you no longer feel the need to argue for your reality. You no longer beg to be seen. You stop molding yourself into something more palatable. You simply stand, steady, clear, whole. And in that moment, you begin to live a life that is finally yours, not shaped by fear, not edited by someone else's expectations, but grounded in truth, your truth. And that's a reality no one else gets to define. They fear exposure more than confrontation. It's not the raised voice or the argument that threatens them. It's the quiet, piercing light of truth that does. Exposure is not about revenge or payback. It's about revealing what has been carefully hidden behind charm, manipulation, and control. It dismantles the facade, and for someone whose power thrives in secrecy, nothing is more terrifying. Confrontation can be managed. It can be turned around, twisted, used as fuel to play the victim or shift blame. But exposure is different. Exposure leaves no room to hide. It's the unmasking of intent, the undoing of the narrative they've built piece by piece by piece. When you begin to speak clearly about what happened, without emotion, without apology, just truth, they lose the ability to twist the story. Because the story is now being told by someone who has nothing to lose and nothing left to protect. This is why silence is often demanded or manipulated. Because if you stay quiet, the illusion stays intact. If you don't speak about the truth, it never has to be addressed. You may notice how the moment you begin to speak up, even in small ways, there's resistance. Suddenly, you're too much, too sensitive, too dramatic. That's not an accident. It's a calculated attempt to make you doubt your voice before it has the chance to reach others. They fear being seen for who they truly are. Not because they believe they've done nothing wrong, but because deep down they know they have. They know what they did wouldn't withstand open conversation. They know their actions only make sense in a world where no one questions them. And they know that once someone starts talking, others might start listening. And worse, others might start remembering. Exposure takes away the weapon of isolation. When truth is shared, it connects people. Suddenly, you're not the only one who noticed the lies, the contradictions, the inconsistencies. Others might step forward with their own stories, their own clarity. And that chain reaction is what breaks the power dynamic that once was impossible to escape. It doesn't always happen quickly. And sometimes it takes just one person being brave enough to say that this is what really happened. There's a reason you may have been discouraged from telling your side of the story. You were told to let it go, to move on, to not create drama. You were made to feel like telling the truth was somehow wrong, unkind, or disloyal. But those are not the words of someone who cares about your healing. Those are the tools of someone who fears accountability. Because exposure doesn't just reveal their actions, it reveals the harm they caused. It puts light on the consequences, the broken trust, the quiet suffering that was never acknowledged. The fear of exposure is rooted in a fragile ego. The image they present to the world is carefully curated, and anything that threatens to shatter that image feels like danger. But the real danger was never the truth. It was the behavior that made the truth so difficult to tell. What they fear isn't exaggeration or defamation. They fear that you'll calmly and clearly explain what actually happened. They fear that you'll stop hiding the reality they forced you to carry. Speaking the truth doesn't require a spotlight. It can happen in quiet conversations, in safe spaces, in therapy, in writing, or in private acknowledgments that say, I know what I lived through. You don't have to tell the whole world. You just have to stop pretending it didn't happen. That alone is exposure. That alone is power. That alone is power. Because it means you are no longer colluding with a lie. And yes, there may be consequences for speaking. You might lose people. You might face pushback. But what you gain is far greater. Self-respect, clarity, and freedom. You free yourself from the exhausting task of maintaining a false peace. You free yourself from the emotional confusion that comes with living in contradiction. And most of all, you reclaim your story. They fear that story because once it's yours again, they can no longer control how it ends. Exposure is not about seeking punishment. It's about healing through honesty. It's about putting down the weight of someone else's deception and standing in the light of your own truth. And no matter how much they resist it, the truth doesn't go away. It waits, and when it's finally spoken, it breaks the silence that protected everything they tried to hide. Choosing to walk away is the ultimate act of strength, not because it's loud or dramatic, but because it requires a kind of courage that's deeply internal, quiet, steady, and unshakable. It's not about giving up or running away. It's about knowing your worth and refusing to stay in a space that continuously asks you to prove it. Walking away says, I've tried, I've given, I've waited, but I won't lose myself in the process of holding on to something that doesn't honor who I am. It's one of the hardest decisions anyone can make, because walking away doesn't just mean leaving a person or situation. It often means walking away from the hope that things could have been different. It means letting go of the fantasy, the potential, the version of the story where things finally work out. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. It's the moment you stop sacrificing your peace for the sake of keeping something intact that's breaking you all along. Strength is not in staying at all costs, it's in knowing when the cost is too high. When your voice is no longer heard, when your needs are consistently unmet, when your spirit feels small, diminished, or doubted. That is the line. That's when the most powerful decision you can make is to step away. Not to hurt anyone, not to punish anyone, but to protect yourself. Because there is no relationship worth losing your sanity, your identity, or your dignity for. Walking away is a boundary that speaks louder than any confrontation. It says, I won't engage in patterns that drain me. It says, I deserve reciprocity. It says, I refuse to normalize dysfunction just because I'm used to it. And it's that refusal, calm, rooted, and non-negotiable, that marks the true reclaiming of your power. You're not trying to change anyone. You're not waiting for the perfect apology or the long overdue change. You're simply choosing you, and that choice can be terrifying, especially if you've spent a long time convincing yourself things weren't that bad. Especially if you've been made to feel responsible for someone else's emotions or reactions. Especially if you've been conditioned to believe that staying, fixing, sacrificing, that's what strength looks like. But real strength is walking away, even when no one understands. Even when they call you selfish, cold, ungrateful. Real strength is choosing your peace over their approval. There may be grief in the beginning. That's normal. You might question yourself, wonder if you did the right thing. Remember the good moments and feel a wave of doubt. But every time you breathe without tension in your chest, every time you sleep without fear of what the next day will bring, every time you speak without censoring your truth, you'll know. You'll feel the difference between surviving and living, between being tolerated and being respected. And eventually, the further you get from what you walked away from, the clearer everything becomes. You begin to see the patterns. You recognize how much energy you spent trying to explain yourself, trying to be understood, trying to hold it all together. And you realize it was never your job to carry the weight of someone else's chaos. You were never meant to make something work that only functioned when you were bending yourself out of shape. Walking away is an act of trust. Trust in your intuition. Trust in your resilience. Trust in your resilience. Trust that even if you don't have all the answers yet, you'll figure it out. Because staying in something that chips away at you little by little is far more dangerous than the unknown that comes with choosing freedom. Freedom to rebuild, to rediscover, to reconnect with yourself without the noise of someone else's expectations constantly drowning you out. You begin to realize that choosing yourself is not selfish, sacred. It's what opens the door to real healing, real connection, and real peace. And the beauty of it is that you don't have to convince anyone of your choice. You don't have to justify it. You just have to live it. Let your peace speak for itself. Let your energy, your boundaries, your joy reflect the strength it took to walk away. Because one day you'll look back and realize that moment, the one where you said enough, the one where you chose to leave, wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The moment your life started moving in the direction of truth, alignment, and freedom. And there's nothing more powerful than that. Truth is not about revenge. It's about liberation. It's not about proving a point, winning a battle, or making someone pay. It's about freeing yourself from the weight of silence, the distortion of reality, and the mental prison of second-guessing your own experiences. Telling the truth, even if it's just yourself, is a declaration of self-respect. It's saying, I will no longer carry a version of the story that protects what hurt me while betraying what's real. Revenge comes from a place of pain, looking for justice through suffering. Truth comes from a place of healing, looking for peace through clarity. They're not the same. Revenge wants to control the outcome to force accountability. Truth wants release. It wants to breathe. It wants to take up space without apology. And when you live in truth, you don't need to force anything. You're no longer tethered to someone else's denial. You're not waiting for validation or permission. You're simply choosing to stop hiding. That's where the power lies. Because when you no longer fear what others will say about your story, you start to reclaim the pieces of yourself you lost trying to protect their version of it. You find your voice, not the reactive voice, but the grounded one. The one that says, "This happened. I remember. I felt it. It mattered." And even if no one else echoes back those words, they become an anchor inside you. Living in truth changes how you see the past. You begin to realize how often you minimize your pain just to avoid conflict. How many times you laughed off the moments that broke you. How often you stayed quiet to keep the peace, even when your silence was costing you your sanity. Truth brings those moments into the light, not to dwell in them, but to acknowledge them. Because acknowledgement is what begins to soften the edges of the pain. It doesn't erase what happened, but it takes away its power to define you. There's nothing petty about telling the truth. There's nothing vindictive about saying, "I was hurt, I was lied to, I was manipulated." There's nothing wrong with putting words to what your body has been carrying for so long. In fact, that's where the healing begins, not in pretending it didn't happen. It didn't happen. Not in spiritual bypassing or toxic positivity, but in the raw, honest, sometimes painful process of naming things as they were. You don't have to shout your truth from the rooftops. You don't have to tell the whole world, but you do have to stop hiding it from yourself. Because as long as you do, the wound stays open. You may function, you may survive, but deep down, there's a part of you that knows you haven't fully come home to yourself. That part is waiting, not for an apology, but for your own recognition. And when you finally give yourself that recognition, you start to move differently. You no longer tolerate things that feel off, even if they're subtle. You don't justify or rationalize what drains your spirit. You don't stay in rooms where you have to shrink to be accepted. You walk with a quiet certainty that says, "I've been through what I've been through, and I'm no longer ashamed of it." This kind of truth doesn't just liberate you, it creates space for others. When you own your story, you give silent permission to others to do the same. You become a mirror that reflects honesty back to the people who are ready to face their own truths. That's how the ripple begins. That's how healing spreads. The goal isn't to ruin someone else's image. The goal is to stop erasing yourself to protect it. The goal is to live a life that feels honest, clear, and rooted in your own knowing. Truth is not loud, but it is firm. It doesn't beg to be believed, it simply stands. And that standing is what sets you free. So let go of the need for revenge. Also, let go of the fantasy that they'll someday understand or admit what they did. Let go of the idea that your healing depends on their remorse. It doesn't. Your healing depends on your truth and your willingness to stand in it, live by it, and let it lead you forward. That's what liberation looks like. Not escape, not erasure, but full, unapologetic truth. Spoken, lived, honored. Once you've touched that kind of freedom, you'll never go back to silence.